into the terminology of the categorization of unordered or disordered systems, they actually have another response, which is, if we talk about the three responses, I think this is one of the key ways to differentiate between ordered and unordered systems.
This is something we've talked about before with hormesis.
Yeah, yeah. But if you have an ordered system, it's something like a mechanical system where the relationships between the way in which it interacts with the world and even with its internal parts is relatively linear. You know that if you do X, you will get Y. In unordered systems, you have non-linear responses, meaning if you do X, you might get Z, you might get B. You don't actually know, and part of the reason for that is the interactions between the parts in that system will often give you responses that you don't expect. Some of them, as we said, can be negative, so that's response one. You apply a stressor, so for instance, you go for a run, that's longer than you've ever done before. The first response might be you actually have pain after that, or you're so fatigued that your performance goes down for the next week. The second response is it's basically neutral. You're not better from the run, you're not worse from the run, and you can get on with your normal training. But the third response, which is what makes unordered systems and non-linearity of these systems valuable, is that they can adapt, and therefore the third response is that the system actually may improve. And what's cool about that is you might go for a run, and then because you were able to carry out that run, the next few runs that you do, or the consequent runs going forward, are actually better. You have more fitness, or you have more speed, or whatever it is. You actually can achieve more from that outcome for future tasks.
What's interesting about this too is this is something that I think is evident when you look at the literature, because I think one of the things that isn't captured well, or perhaps not highlighted, is the range of response to a particular stimulus. And when you think about research, typically they'll provide averages or means about response to a particular stimulus. And that's useful because it gives you an idea that there is a bit of a signal there that in response to this type of training stimulus, we're going to see on average this particular outcome. But it doesn't give you an indication of the range. And I think that's a really important thing to highlight too, because it highlights straight away that there is complexity in human systems, is that the response and outcome will vary. Because sometimes you're going to have hyper responders, people who actually have a much more significant and hopefully positive response to the stimulus, but you're also going to have non-responders. There's actually a reason for that. I don't think that may not always be captured in the research, because if you even think about your inclusion exclusion criteria, there may be factors that they don't take into consideration that will separate who does respond and who doesn't respond. But certainly within the real world, we see this all the time. But I think one of the challenges that we have is trying to understand who is going to respond the way that you want them to.
And I think that brings forward one of the more interesting parts of dealing with these kind of systems. And you say that, straight away I think obviously towards sport and my coaching of athletics, and
sure,
you have someone, you apply the same program to the two people and they're in the same events and their performance level is relatively similar. One gets better and one gets worse, or one gets injured. And that straight away makes you start thinking, as you said, what's the difference between who's going to respond positively and who's going to respond negatively, and who's going to have no response or a neutral response.
And that's where I think the challenge lies. And for someone like yourself who's working with the same athlete over a long period of time, you start to understand the patterns that emerge in that individual, because you understand the physical factors, with regards to, say, their training history, their fiber typology, but you also understand all the other factors with regards to some of the hormetic stress profile, like their sleep, their diet, relation